Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, doing well.
Good.
So what kind of a problem are we going to solve today?
We'll try to do a couple.
We don't always solve problems, but we point out the problems, and we suggest what the alternatives are, and hopefully we'll have an impact someday and move in the direction of more freedom, less government, more common sense, and maybe we will make progress. Right now, though, we still have problems with our streets. When a country is in good shape, morally and financially, the streets aren't, burning and fighting and rioting, but right now they're getting worse. And of course, everybody knows now, if you look at the media, it's all Trump's fault.
Yeah.
Trump's cause. He has organized Black Lives Matter and tells them when to make the charges and what to do. A bit cynical, but that's what's going on now. Is that they have to blame somebody. But the streets are a mess, and certain states are a lot worse. And the Republicans are absolutely right in pointing out which states and which cities they are, and they have been run by radical leftists.
Yeah.
And they had these opinions about who should be running the cities, and the whole thing is they're responsible for nothing. Anything is wrong, and they have to, of course, then have somebody to blame. And of course, it's the other side of the political spectrum. Even though when you look at the big pictures, there are so many things that they agree on in a negative sense. The two parties basically aren't complaining about spending. You'd think a campaign like this might entertain the thought of talking about the deficits and the spending and the printing of money, the Federal Reserve, the foreign policy of interventionism, so many of these things. But they are finding things to argue about, which is just pure politics. Now it is on who are they going to blame for the problems in the street. And there was one report, I think yesterday, that the organizations, the people who give the marching orders say, well, we have to get tough. These guys are starting too many things. That is, the left is blaming the right for the riot, and the police have caused everything. We know the police has problems. We've talked about it, and changes could be made, but not this way. They're making it much, much worse. As a matter of fact, the end result of this may be that the police may be stronger in the negative sense, that they will become more authoritarian. But anyway, that is a problem going on. But the instructions to the lefties, the people who are organized, and they are organized, and more information is coming out about this. Where do these people come from? How do they arrive? And did you read one thing where they were staying at good hotels and traveling around the country? And now the instructions came out that they need to make sure that they win this fight. So it's the police's fault. It's the people who are conservative, the people who take chloroquine, and the people that do things that way. And so they say, if a policeman pulls a gun in his law enforcement activity, he should be assassinated. I mean, this is an indication he should be killed. And a lot of that, I wouldn't say a lot, but a significant amount of that is already going out. The numbers of policemen that are being killed, by the rioters going up all the time. But now, this is a sort of like official policy. And I think, how could it be? These are just spontaneous riots. Really. Yeah. I mean, these are well organized. They're philosophically backed. They're financially backed. And they're very well organized. I've been amazed at how organized they are and how they can, precipitate these problems. And I never quite visualized, but it's been described, that they literally are transported from one city to the next in order to store up the trouble. So there's blood in the streets right now, and there's an argument on who's to blame. And that has to become, if it isn't already, the number one issue in the campaign this year. And it'd be ironic that if this gives a boost to Trump like nobody ever expected by the people who hate Trump, it may just have backfired on them.
And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of this backtracking and trying to to calm down because the numbers are showing people are sick of this. They're sick of what's happening. We were looking at an article that mentions a civics poll taken recently showing a sharp drop in support for Black Lives Matter from 25% in June to 12% now support. People are unhappy about it. They're seeing the hypocrisy. The last night in Portland, they've had about 100 nights of rioting, nonstop rioting, burning things, looting things, breaking up buildings, all sorts of things. Basically, the mayor has done nothing at all until last night. They set a fire close to his apartment building, and that's when that's taking it too far, right? So he declared a riot. He's all in favor of them, but the revolution always eats its own. So now he's on the menu because they hate him because he didn't go far enough, even though he's as radical as it gets. Well, he had a press conference yesterday where the whole thing is Trump's fault. All the people burning his city, trying to burn his house down, it's all Trump's fault because he's dividing us and dividing the country. And we saw Biden yesterday blaming the person who defended himself in Wisconsin rather than the people who were trying to kill him, who ended up on the wrong end of an AR-15. So they're realizing now that this isn't polling well. If you look at the numbers, Biden is dropping and Trump is rising. He's got this handed on his lap, really, the law and order issue. And I think they're realizing now that they've got a panic on their hands.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see Bill Maher's statements. He's a radical leftist, and I know about him. But actually, we had an agreement on not fighting so many foreign wars. But Bill Maher is coming out, and he's been warning them for several weeks now, and he probably has had some influence. He says, "You guys are not picking the right things to do this fight. You're going to make sure Trump gets in." And he may have perceived this correctly. He may have had some influence on it. But, even if they do shift, we heard Biden yesterday. He in more calm atmosphere, he sounded like a reasonable person, but I think it's a little bit too little too late for them to reverse this and say that they are the champions of peace on the streets here. And how are they going to reverse the crime rates? And matter of fact, they might decide, they might be starting to listen to these statistics, and the statistics have been out. Yeah, there's riots going on, and you get 10, 15, 20 people killed here and there. But what about if you look at the past 5 years in all the liberal cities? The weekends. I mean, and look at them statistically, and it's always, just putting up some stats like that, in advertisement. Who runs these cities? Why is it like this?
Yeah.
And why do they have the most poverty? Could it be that welfareism and socialism and Marxism doesn't work?
Yeah, and Chicago is another great example because the hypocrisy is so thick there that it's not even funny. This is a city where the mayor ordered the drawbridges raised because it was absolute mayhem. I mean, it's a battlefield every night. There are, they want to defund the police. The mayor, Lori Lightfoot, has actually encouraged Black Lives Matter to riot in this city. But something happened when they got a little too close to her home. Let's look at this. If you remember this earlier this month, look at this clip. "Hey, I have a right to make my home secure." This is what she said when she took all of these policemen off the beat, off of defending other people from being, beaten up by Black Lives Matter, and put them all in front of her home as her little fortress. Hey, don't blame me. I have a right to have a secure house.
She demonstrated it so well. The atmosphere of politicians being above everybody else. And there's always a degree of this, but she's the extreme degree of this. I mean, she literally said that she has more rights than anybody else because she's important. She's the mayor, and she's going to bring, peace and prosperity to the city. So she's destroying the city. She thinks she deserves special attention. Well, she deserves to be fired.
Yeah,
so
she'd hope
to keep her paying her money to be able to do this. When will they wake up?
That's no different in Washington, D.C. Just the other night when a bunch of people were leaving the RNC convention, including Senator Paul. This is another Democrat-run city, and the rioters and the looters ran rampant. They tried to attack Senator Paul. They did attack some other people who were leaving, just trying to peacefully walk by. And, the peaceful protests that the media is telling us are not that peaceful. And this has become kind of a meme because it is so hilarious. This is an actual CNN reporter in front of Kenosha, Wisconsin, burning to the ground with the headline, "Fiery but mostly peaceful protests after police shooting." And it's so comical, it looks like it's fake, but it's not. And actually, it spawned a lot of other really funny ones, like the next one, if we can put that up. This is obviously it's a spoof, but airship ride fiery but mostly peaceful, and there are plenty of those like that. Japanese flyover of Pearl Harbor, fiery but mostly peaceful. So it's funny, but it's not funny. But these cities are burning up, and the blame is trying to be put on Trump and the Republicans. There's certainly a lot of blame for other things, but I don't think it's sticking. I don't think the numbers suggest it's sticking.
When I see things like this happening, because we know the police aren't perfect, nobody's perfect, but when the police make a mistake, that becomes an excuse. It's not a reason. They don't reason that. So if there's an excuse to incite the people, they do it and they go out there. But their goal is always the same. I think this goal is just not miscellaneous. I think it's well planned, and their goal is Marxism of some sort. So it's something that is very real, getting worse. And talking with Rand, you brought his name up. He's had a bad year or two. Not really bad, but he's had some episodes. Because when I talked to him after the baseball game, he wasn't exactly calm and cool. All of us would have been frightened.
They're shooting.
But I haven't talked to him personally on this, but I've seen his interviews. And his interviews, along with Kelly's, I mean, they were really, really scared, and I guess rightfully so. But it's something weird about this in front of the White House? I mean, even from the side of the people that are supposed to provide protection, it seems like you should be able to walk in front of the White House almost any time, let alone when there are large crowds like this. But it was scary. But I think that even that incident is going to provide more empathy, for our side of the issue. These people are just so bold and so evil that it's going to continue to shift this attention. And I keep thinking that this stuff really reminds me, because I followed closely the election in 1968. I mean Nixon. And it turned out he wasn't the greatest president, but it turned out that law and order was still very important to the people.
Yeah, and it will be. Well, speaking of horrible people, if we can actually skip ahead too. I misnumbered the JPEGs. But speaking of terrible people, our favorite Ethiopian communist, Dr. Tedros, is back in the news. He's feeling jealous because no one's paying attention to him anymore because COVID is dying everywhere. We just found out yesterday, we talked about it yesterday, that the fact is that about 6% of the people they claim died from COVID died from it rather than with it. So the numbers should be radically. But here's what he said. He's upset. He says, no country can just pretend the pandemic is over. He's upset that the governments around the world are easing up. You got to keep it shut down. He says the more control countries have over the virus, the more they can open up. But opening up without control is a recipe for disaster. I don't know what his game is. He's not a medical doctor at all. He's a politician. He happens to be a member of a party that's not that tasteful in our view. What is the game? And the game seems to be world control. The behavior, and we talk about Scott Atlas in a little bit, but the attitude is that somehow that herd immunity is a conspiracy theory that some crazy Trump supporter thought up. It's almost as if history before yesterday never existed, the history of mankind, and in fact, our own immune systems are a conspiracy theory themselves.
Yeah, he said that you just can't pretend it's over. I still argue that someday we're going to see an article, unfortunately late in the game. It's not going to be next week. But this has already started, comparing things. But I'll bet you that if they're very honest with themselves, they'll be able to compare, say, the number of people who died from influenza and the number of people who really died from coronavirus.
Yeah.
I wonder how they handle the death certificate when somebody has influenza and they die of a heart attack. Do you think they broadcast influenza?
Yeah,
They don't. And that little episode that we read on Bob Wenzel's site, Target Liberty, about the interview with some nurses in a hospital. They were just really upfront about how they were instructed to make sure everything was distorted and made it look like the virus was much more dangerous and killing people. They were needing to change things when the hospital was actually empty. So that's some one report, and we don't know the people, but I happen to think there was a lot of truth in what that interview was showing. I think that was in his paper yesterday.
Target Liberty. Yeah. Well, the hospitals wanted the money. And we know this, but when they passed that bailout act, they were given thousands of dollars for every COVID diagnosis and more thousands of dollars if you put them on a ventilator and more thousands of dollars if they died.
Right.
Hospitals wanted the money. The politicians wanted control, and they've gotten it even down to our little town here of Lake Jackson. They've gotten control over people, and they wanted to harm Trump politically, which they did at first, but it looks like it might be backfiring on them. But the funny thing about Tedros, the Ethiopian communist, is he's talking about we must prevent amplifying events. We must not let people get together. And we talked about the big motorcycle rally in Sturgis. You'd expect that they'd be dropping like flies now. It's been a couple of weeks since they had the rally. Nobody's gotten it. There's been no spike. Yeah, there's a couple more people in South Dakota that's gotten it, but it hasn't been a spike. So everything they claim is absolutely untrue about this.
Well, this brings up the politics of what's going on with the president, because he did actually at the beginning, unfortunately, was too close to Fauci, and he's still there, and Fauci still has a lot of credibility, but less so all the time.
Yeah, thankfully.
But he's been replaced by a medical advisor, Dr. Scott Adams. Dr. Scott Atlas. And, I was reading about him, and he's been saying all the things, but he has credibility now because he's out there, and he's getting more publicity. But I was impressed because on the last one I read, because he was citing a significant investigation from the Henry Ford Hospital. So that caught my attention because I just happened to have spent 2 years in internal medicine at the Henry Ford Hospital. I knew it was good, but he's using that as the key study. So, and I think that's important. But he has had good coverage, but he's also gotten involved in politics. And my first reaction was, I want him just to be, reporting, on the medical side of this. But in some ways, he's a policy guy. And if he has the credibility and there's people distorting, the science for their policy side, I think the litmus test is he telling the truth?
Yeah.
Does he have the right answers there? And so there he was in Florida and different places, supporting a political position, because in Florida I think they were arguing about when to open the schools and all this technical thing, and they railroad people into it, and the governor in Florida has taken an independent stand. So there is politics involved, but the litmus test ought to be the science of it all. And and I think the politicians who may not have done the research themselves, they have to find the people who they can rely on, the authentic and reliable research done, which isn't the case with WHO and with the CDC. I mean, I don't think they're reliable. I think they were political from the very beginning. And I think you might have even mentioned that Dr. Atlas made the point that it would be so much different. What if Donald Trump came out at the very beginning and said, don't anybody ever use hydroxychloroquine?
Everyone would be using it.
Everybody would be using it. So you talk about insanity and harm done, and people doing things for very, very partisan reasons.
I want to bring up, I think it's an explosive article, and I know you're going to want to comment. If we can go, and actually I'm sorry, but just go back one from Tedros and to the New York Times thing. This is a piece in the New York Times, of all places. Your coronavirus test is positive. maybe it shouldn't be. This is a couple of days ago. And this is fascinating. They say, why would they do this? It's undermining the narrative. Well, part of it's they're trying to cover their you-know-whats, and part of it is it's a limited hangout. They're trying to preserve the narrative by appearing to attack the narrative. But basically what this article is about, and it's really worth reading, you got to read between the lines a little bit, is that the standard tests that they're using are diagnosing huge numbers of people who are carrying very insignificant amounts of the virus. The tests are tuned down and they're picking up any kind of virus. These people are not likely contagious, and they're also making identifying actually sick people difficult, because everyone who's asymptomatic is getting tested. You have these huge numbers of positives that just have a couple of little fragments of the virus. But here's what's fascinating in this article. This is a quote. In the sets of testing data compiled by officials in Massachusetts, New York, and Nevada, up to 90% of the people testing positive carried barely any virus. Barely any virus.
And this is why the credibility of the testing is being diminished all the time, which is good, because I just don't put any stock in any of these reports on these tests that they do. And then the people, part of the hysteria that the government or the people who want coronavirus to be a crisis, people get terrified, and they make it worse by, when can I get the test? When can I get the test? And when can I get the vaccine? When am I going to get the vaccine? And to think that they're going to base vaccinations on this stuff, I think is very, very dangerous. That's why I love what the work Robert Kennedy is doing right now, because he's talking about, the vaccines and the drug companies and all that goes on, because this is just so distorted. And they already admit that the vaccines probably won't work, maybe 50%, 50, 60%, they aren't going to work. And there's people in the administration are saying, oh yeah, they're just about tested, they're safe and effective.
Right.
They don't know that at all, and it's all politics. I just hope they stall long enough where they don't pump some of this vaccine out just to get it in before November. Because it could cause a lot of harm, and people die from vaccines, and especially it can't possibly be tested. What is tested is herd immunity, and they totally ignore the science of herd immunity.
Well, that's a conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah, that's in the same way with hydroxy. They know what they have experience with that, and they know what to do, but they totally ignore it. So mess.
Well, I've got one more little graphic, and then I'll close it out. But if we can put up this one, this is really fascinating. I found this on Twitter. This is what they claimed on the left. Here's their model. Without protective measures, you'd overrun the healthcare system. So we had to flatten the curve, and that's the blue thing, protective measures. That's what they claimed. The reality is the one on the right. New York with protective measures. Look what happened there. Florida without protective measures. Look what happened there in terms of COVID deaths. So the reality is exactly inverse from what they claimed when they wanted to shut everything down just for 2 weeks. Remember, just for 2 weeks. And I do want to close by reminding everyone, and my daughter started this week with the Ron Paul curriculum. If we can put that last clip up. Tom Woods over at ronpaulhomeschool.com has got some great savings, some discounts for people. Parents are looking for something to do. The schools are prisons. I was talking to one of our colleagues in the office today about what's happened to her grandchildren. They're putting them around to different places. They're not allowed to do anything. It's horrible. Homeschooling, the Ron Paul curriculum, is a great way to do it if you're interested in looking at homeschooling. You're going to save a lot of time, and your kid is going to be really interested. I walked in from our show yesterday back to my home office, and my wife and my daughter were both watching Tom Woods give a lecture. So everyone likes it. So check it out. Give it a shot. If you're interested in that, I think it'll be a good solution for people.
Yes. Well, Dr. Atlas would agree with what you just got talking about on the testing, because this little headline here, he says, hydroxychloroquine, he says, very safe, says Scott Atlas. Blast, and then he goes on and he blasts garbage medical studies. He didn't mince words. That's what they are. They're garbage. But politically, they go a long way, and they're carried along. And that's probably one of the things that annoys me the most. The whole thing of scaring people, fear in people, and hysteria. And it made me come up one time with a word called a hoax. And it is a hoax. Not the fact that there's a virus, not the fact that the virus can be very dangerous, not the fact that you ought to have medical treatment. The fact is that there's so much distortion. You ought to rely on common sense and medical needs, not political chicanery. That's where the real problem is. So the hoax, from my viewpoint, has been the reaction to it. You know how dangerous it is. The garbage, that's what is a proper name for so much of what's happened these past, 5 or 6 months now, and all the wrong things done. And this is so bad because it has scared so many people. It's helped to ruin the economy. It's helped to scare young people, helped to incite people to serious psychological problems. And yet they say, oh no, we can't stop because we have to prevent this from happening. We can't pretend the pandemic's over. If it is, we got to get a new one fast, to keep this going. So it's a sad thing. So we have a job on our hands, and we all have a job on our hands, because our viewers, if you're listening, I know you care about this, but spread the message which you can with as much as you can to try to get people to read the right stuff. And I think this election year is important, because this is a big issue in the election year. And any way you can get the information, I think that is the solution. It shouldn't be settled in the streets. That scares me when that happens, and yet it's getting close to home, and that's bad. But we should be able to counteract this with, arguing and issuing and being more intellectual about it. But quite frankly, the people who are managing the streets right now and causing the crisis, they're not interested in that, because the only philosophy they're interested in is totalitarianism and Marxism, and they have seen an opening, and they have proved they are very powerful. But I tell you what, we have a more powerful weapon. We have truth on our side, and we have the fact that if you want, to live in a peaceful society and work for peace and prosperity, they're going to lose the fight. For practical reasons, we ought to win. And I think you should be hearing from us lately that maybe it's breaking through. Maybe the truth is breaking out. And regardless of where exactly we are, doesn't change our responsibility. Our responsibility is to seek out the truth and spread the message. I want to thank, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.